Tabaczek, who teaches systematic theology here at the Angelicum. I've known of Father Mariusz's work and been a great admirer of it for a number of years. He did his doctoral studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, held a fellowship at Notre Dame University, taught again in his native Poland at the Thomistic Institute in Warsaw before coming here to the Angelicum as Professor of Theology, where he's developed a very significant reputation, very influential in the debate between science and theology, issues of divine action, and interpretations of evolutionary theory. He's the author of 2 monographs, the first entitled Emergence Towards a New Metaphysics and Philosophy of Science, that was published in 2019, the second entitled Divine Action and Emergence, an Alternative to Pantheism, published in 2021, and is about to publish a new monograph very soon. Pleasure and delight for me to invite you to welcome Father Mariusz Tabaczek. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Oliver, for this kind introduction. I laughed during the break and I said Professor Oliver that if what he presented was a Protestant notion of creation theology, I don't know what I am supposed to say, because I believe I'm in line with basically everything he said. So what I will do in my presentation will be, in a way, a reiteration, in a way, of the most basic principles of the definition of creation on the side of Aquinas, where I would like to see and speak about Aquinas as somebody who actually struggles with this dogma, because what Professor Oliver presented is the received tradition, which again I side with, and it may sound as if it is stable, clear, which it is, but at the same time I think it comes from a struggle of Aquinas himself, who's trying to name something that is in a way impossible for us to name and to know anything about, which is again creation. And then I will say a few words about the goodness and dignity of creatures as causes, again in a way a reiteration of what was said before, maybe a few aspects added to what was said before. And then I would refer this knowledge of creation to a particular issue which is important nowadays in the dialogue between contemporary culture and scientifically oriented culture and theology, that is creation and evolution question. And I will try to show how clear and careful reading of Aquinas helps us to avoid, I will mention 2 difficulties in contemporary Christian interpretations of evolutionary theory coming from the Aristotelian Thomistic perspective. And then at the end, if there's still time, because I was asked to speak about what is creation, how do we know about creation, then maybe a few words at the end about how we know and learn about creation. So at first, what is creation? And again, Aquinas is someone who struggles with this question. And I think that he does struggle when you read throughout his works on this issue. And therefore, we can, I believe, name and classify at least 4 aspects of the definition of creation, which I believe tell us that, or show us that this Aquinas' struggle with this doctrine. So he doesn't want to go purely into an apophatic direction. He wants to say something meaningful about what creation is. And if he wants to do that, he feels like he has to use the language of causality in one way or the other. And he does so. He would say that causation is production. He will repeatedly use the term production when he speaks about creation. And it is, for him, I believe, a causal production, yet, as Professor Oliver emphasized, without movement or change, right? He would say that if there is a movement or change, or movement and change that we know from our observation of creation, created reality always involves something that already is and is the basis for a movement or change. And he says that creation should be defined as, yes, production of all being by the universal cause, which is God, but without change or movement. So it sounds like a contradiction, but we have to, in a way, enter this sort of language, and we can do that once we, again, realize and emphasize this. He tells us that created of God, considered formal miracle, cannot be included in any categories of being distinguished by Aristotle, and therefore it is a supracategorical or transcendental act. And yet, having said this, he still will use the language of causal agency, language of production. So this is the first struggle that we can see in the way that he tries to understand creation. So having said this, that it is at the end of the day some sort of causal agency in production, he asks another question: what kind of production might it be? And the answer to that question will be, as emphasized before today, creation is the production of things ex nihilo. Now, having said this or added this to his definition, Aquinas emphasizes that we have to be careful here, because our tendency here would be to think about this nothingness as some empty void, some emptiness out there on which God acts. So here Aquinas would add another clarification, saying that, and it is crucial here, in creation, the recipient of divine action is not non-being, but which is that which is created. And it is crucial here because this is the moment where, surprisingly, I think, at least in a way, another aspect enters this definition of creation for Aquinas, which is an emanationist aspect. For Aquinas does define creation, so he offers us with a number of definitions in fact, and one of these would be this. He will say we must consider the emanation of all being from the universal cause, which is God, and this emanation of all being from God we designate by the name creation. So there will be a causal aspect, but there will be an emanationist aspect of creation for him. And as Professor Oliver mentioned before, a legitimate question comes with this. Is creation, if creation is emanation of all things from God, aren't creatures at least partially divine, as Neo-Platonists would say? And as we know already, what Aquinas believes saves him from this conclusion is his strong emphasis on the fact that the existence of God and of creatures is predicated analogically and not uniformly, with reference to those two analogies mentioned here before. But this is a very important aspect of the definition of creation in Aquinas. Recently, in 2021, Daniel Source published an article in New Black Friars, where he actually suggests that knowing this and reading Aquinas and this definition of creation, he gives among other definitions, maybe very carefully, but he suggests maybe it is appropriate and possible to speak about creation in Aquinas as being creation ex God, ex nihilo and ex God, but not ex nihilo, which means not ex Deo. So it's a controversial piece, also among Thomists, but maybe taking this into account, we could at least to some extent agree with that. But then the causal aspect of creation has another, we may say, characteristic or another side to it. The first side of the causal aspect of creation is, as I said, production of all things ex nihilo, which is causal agency. But the second side of the same coin is upholding of all things in existence, which we may classify as or called conservatio ad nihilo, and the famous quotation from Aquinas on providence of God, where he says that things would fall into nothingness immediately, if not God who sustains them in being. Now, what is crucial for us here, from my perspective, as I address to later on the theory of evolution and its interpretation in reference to theology, the terminology here is crucial. Aquinas would use following two terms: conservatio rerum in esse, a conservation of things in their existence, and conservatio rerum in bono, because creation obviously has a normative aspect for him. Another term that became very popular recently and is used by virtually all theistic evolutionists today is creatio continua, which means continual creation. Now, the truth is that, to my knowledge, Aquinas never uses this. He never used this term, creatio continua, and it was Francisco Suarez who claims that Aquinas does speak about the continual creation, but again, the very term is not used by Aquinas, and I will get back to it later on. But here, the second side or second aspect of, or second characteristic feature of the causal aspect of creation is named by Aquinas. Now, the third, but this is not the end of the story, because for Aquinas, the definition of creation, and I think he struggles with this as well, will also have a temporal aspect. So again, I reiterated what was being said, but trying to systematize it in a slightly different way. Yes, the creatio ex nihilo is totally outside of time and space, but because it gives origin to time and space, we may say that at least in this way, it has also a temporal aspect to it. And therefore, Aquinas will speculate on it, and he will use this, or he will present us with this claim: creation is instantaneous. And it is therefore an indivisible instant, and therefore it is, and this indivisible instant is the beginning of time, and in itself it's necessarily indivisible. Again, this is important because, I mean, for some reasons it is important, and I will refer to those reasons again when I will speak about evolutionary theory. And when we speak about divine conservatio of things, here we have to acknowledge that on the side of God who acts, it is again outside of time. But on the side of creatures that receive this divine agency of sustaining things in being, it is in time, because this is sustaining things in being which continue, those beings continue in time. So therefore, this temporal aspect needs to be taken into account. And here Aquinas will say that this preservation of things by God is a continuation of that action whereby he gives existence. But again, this action is without motion or time, but with reference to motion and time. Because motion and time flow from what comes out of this action, which is outside of motion and time. And then the last, fourth aspect of creation, of the definition in Aquinas, is the relational aspect of creation, right? And here, when Aquinas defines this aspect, he's actually pretty radical with respect to other aspects. So it's interesting when we read him to see how in particular contexts he emphasizes particular aspects in a way that may seem put aside or even sometimes dismiss other aspects. This is a relation of dependence on the side of creatures, and where creation is, so one of the examples where he defines it, he would say creation is not a change, but the very dependency of the created act of being on the principle it flows from, which is fine. But when we go to another example in Summa Theology, creation in the creature is only a relation to creator as the principle of its being. And towards the end of his career as scholar, he says this: creation is really nothing but a relation of the creature to creator together with a beginning of existence. So it seems like the beginning of existence is not as important as this dependency of creatures on God. And I emphasize this because, again, in reference to evolution, I will mention about those who I would overemphasize this aspect, trying to find an easy answer to the question and challenge of evolutionary theory. This dependency in Aquinas is defined, and his main emphasis is on the dependence of creatures on God in existence, as we heard before today. But in my writings, I also try to emphasize the aspect of essence and dependence of creatures on God in their essence, in their essentia. It's not that it's not present in Aquinas, it is, but I mean, at least I think it is important in terms of what I do in my approach to evolutionary theory. Okay, this relationship of dependence is asymmetrical, and this is the part, the crucial part of the classical approach to creation theology, and born of content and even rejection, stark and radical rejection of the classical approach to creation theology within the contemporary context, where we may speak about a quiet revolution. This is a term used by one of the proponents of panentheism, not pantheism but panentheism. Those who follow this approach to creation theology, they claim that Aquinas is teaching precisely this aspect of his definition of creation is an absurdity that jeopardizes Christianity's most fundamental religious affirmation. This comes from the side of Protestant thinkers more than Catholics, but you will find also Catholics who embrace what I bring here in an elaboration of the definition brought by Henry Gregerson and follower of panentheism, where panentheism would say that because we can say that creature, this is a claim that creation is in God, and it's really that this interaction has to be symmetrical and there has to be some return of the world into the life of God. So this is this picture of or image of God or idea of God, where creation is within the very substance of God, and yet God is more than creation in itself. So when we take into account the contemporary possibilities in terms of the definition of the relationship between God and the universe, so on the left-hand side we have the classical theistic approach. It's difficult because to depict it because it looks like creation is outside of God. Well, it is and it is not. There's a real relationship of creatures towards God and logical relationship of God towards creatures as the main and the first cause of everything. And then the panentheistic scheme is on the right corner, where we have creation within the substance of God, but not. It's not pantheism because God is more than creation, but there is this interrelationship where creation affects God. So, bringing all this together, we have active agency on the part of God for Aquinas, and passive reception of divine agency on the part of creatures in his definition of creation. Now, this active divine agency includes primordial creative act executive and sustaining and preserving creatures from falling into nothingness. And then we have the part dependence of creatures on God in their existence and their essence, I would say, which is the reception of this continual act of sustaining things in being. All this helps us to build the classical Catholic and Christian understanding of the goodness of created things and their dignity as causes. So Aquinas is aware of the danger of dualistic approach to nature. This is a longer quotation, I will not read it, where he speaks about origin, who, as you know, thought that matter is an outcome of sin, not a part of God's original purpose. And what is important for us here is Aquinas' response, which is clear and strong. The entire universe, with all its parts, is ordained towards God as its end, inasmuch as it imitates, as it were, and shows forth the divine goodness to the glory of God. So therefore, it cannot be, all aspects of creation must be good. Which brings us to the dignity, the topic of the dignity of creatures as causes. Aquinas would say, as you may know, that there are two things that belong to divine providence: the type of order, which is ordained to an end, and the execution of this order, which is called government. And as regards the first of these aspects, God has immediate providence over everything. But as to the second, which is the government of creation, he governs things inferior by superior through, which is he does that through intermediary causes, which are natural, secondary, and instrumental causes. This is another crucial distinction that Aquinas introduces. I think it's more elaborate in the commentators of Aquinas, especially contemporary commentators. Aquinas has clear distinction between first and secondary causes, but also he introduces the category of instrumental causes, where secondary causes bring changes, the realization of which lies within the scope of natural dispositions of such cause. And instrumental cause would be a special type of secondary cause where it can bring changes, the realization of which lies beyond the scope of natural dispositions, which saves us from, it saves us from occasionalism and deism, or says Aquinas' account of creation and divine action in the created universe, because with these precise distinctions, divine action in the world is concurrent and not competitive. So this dignity of causes was emphasized throughout the entire history of theology, but more recently, the Second Vatican Council, just one example I wanted to bring here. In Gaudium Spes, in point 36, we read that all things are endowed with their own stability, truth, goodness, proper laws, and order, and therefore whoever labors to penetrate the secrets of reality with a humble and steady mind, even though that person might be unaware of this fact, that person is nevertheless being led by the hand of God, who holds all things in existence and gives them their identity, also as causal agents in nature. So we have all this, the classical understanding of creation, and now I would like to address specifically in the topic of creation and evolution. It has many or several aspects to it, and it's not, I don't have time to discuss all this in the conferences, so it's not on this topic, but I would like to show how this careful reading of Aquinas and awareness of those four aspects of his definition of creation helps us avoid some, I think, mistakes that happen and errors in the Christian approach to evolutionary theory. So what are those opinions that I would like to address here that require some critical evaluation? So some actually Thomistic scholars would emphasize that for Aquinas, they would put a strong emphasis on creation as defined as relation. So they would say what really counts for Aquinas is that creation is this relation of creatures towards God as their first cause. And whether the created reality is static or dynamic, it is a secondary thing. To some extent, we may even say it is unimportant, because what really counts is the aspect of relation. And then the second, I think, error was a mistaken approach or interpretation or conclusion that is brought in creation theology in reference to evolutionary theory, is the claim that we really find among many, if not almost the majority of theistic evolutionists, is that theology embracing the evolutionary perspective needs to and does acknowledge that creation is an ongoing process. Creatio continua is being used here, where the claim is that God continually creates ex nihilo as he did in the beginning, and he does that through evolutionary processes, and he does that through creatures as secondary causes, who therefore participate in divine act of creation. So examples coming here from Protestant authors, but we can find to some extent similar claims also made by Catholics, sometimes also by Thomists. So in my recently published article and my upcoming book, I address all those references. So Arthur Peacock says creation goes on all the time, and it's not just one off event. To some extent we agree, but we have to be careful here, and I will show why. And then Philip Layton, God invites creatures to participate in God's own creative activity within the world, a state of affairs that Lord Howe calls creatio ex creatione, a new terminology introduced here, or following another theologian, creatio ex amore, which makes us created co-creators with God. I find this language really radical. Okay. Now, in response first to the first claim on this slide, which is a claim that for Aquinas what really counts is the relational aspect in the definition of creation. I don't think this is the case. I think for Aquinas all four aspects that I mentioned count, and this time aspect or temporal aspect of creation, even though the act of creation is outside itself of time, it is crucial for Aquinas to emphasize that the very act of creatio ex nihilo, once again, is an instantaneous act. And therefore, he does that also, obviously, in reference to Genesis, but also his entire philosophical machinery that he has from Aristotle. But this aspect is important, and we cannot leave it aside. And in reference to precisely this, once again, claim that it is an instantaneous act of God, Aquinas would say that opus creationis in itself is covered by the first sentence of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the reality. This is creation for Aquinas. What happens later on in his analysis of the work of 6 days is opus distinctionis and opus ornatus, where things are distinguished and then new things or new kinds of things are brought into existence. So this temporal aspect, even if this temporal aspect of the definition of creation would be again just the claim that it is an instantaneous act, is important for Aquinas, and he will ask therefore himself the question: if this is the fact that everything came into existence momentarily, instantaneously, do we have to then acknowledge that everything came into existence in the form and the state that we encounter today? This is a question that he will ask in reference to this temporal aspect. Therefore, to say that for Aquinas only relational aspect counts, I think it's wrong. You just cannot dismiss other aspects. Has asked himself this question again, whether all creatures came instantaneously in the form that we know them. He doubts about it, also based on his interpretation of Genesis, and he reaches to, obviously, to Augustine here and his idea of seeds, seed principles, for logos where Augustine would say this: God unfolds the generations which he laid up in creation when he first founded it. And he adds, God created all creatures together in this instantaneous moment, but the visible forms of those things he produces throughout the ages, working even until now. And this will be something that Aquinas will accept and develop in his understanding and interpretation of the 6 days of creation. And I'm bringing together bits and pieces of his account. He would say, plants and trees might have been produced in their origin or causes, that is, the earth received the power to produce them, and they were subsequently brought into existence in the work of propagation. Similar with fishes and birds, they were produced by the nature of waters on that 5th day potentially, and animals whose production was potential as well. Now, what is crucial and important for us here is this. As you can imagine, when evolutionary theory was developed by or offered by Darwin, actually immediately we find first Catholics who would refer to both to Augustine and Aquinas, saying it shouldn't be a problem for Catholic, for classical Catholic theology, because this sounds like an evolutionary thinking. So we have to be careful here. Because gradualism, of which Augustine and Aquinas speak, is not equal with evolutionary transformation. In other words, the fact that things that are for Augustine hidden in a primordial matter and then actualized with time, this is something different from saying that one species changes into another species. But at the same time, so this is something that basic evolutionists say oftentimes, and it is in a way we have to be careful here because it is without qualification it would be a mistake. But I don't have time here, enough time to develop what I'm about to say in few words. But I emphasize it, and I work it out in my other publications. I claim that Thomistic metaphysics and Aristotelian Thomistic metaphysics offers us actually with a philosophical framework that helps us to go beyond what actually Augustine did and offer a metaphysical framework of evolutionary transitions which may be actually acceptable today. This is not something that Aquinas does himself because the science of biology is different at his time, but I think this metaphysics and this philosophy offers us tools that enable us to do so. So just a short reference to the main point of this proposal. Aquinas at some point in the Anima, on the Anima, he says this. He says that matter can be understood to receive accidents by which it is disposed to a higher perfection. So he has an idea of the reality which is in flux, because there is a stability, but there is also changeability in reality. And those changes that happen in reality, they dispose or predispose matter and primary matter. There are 2 levels of potentiality here that we can speak about, such that matter can be disposed to being actualized by new substantial form. That is, it wouldn't be just actualization of something that is hidden in matter, as Augustine wanted it to have, with limited number of those possible creatures that may come into existence. You would have all logically possible forms of living organisms here. They can actually be actualized when matter is properly disposed. So therefore my proposal is that natural kinds defined in terms of particular yes, unchanging types of substantial forms, because the type of substantial form of a dog, for example, is unchanging in some respect. Natural kinds defined in terms of those particular unchanging types of substantial form, yet actualizing concrete individual contingent temporal and constantly changing organisms may be thought therefore as evolving. And my basic aspect or crucial aspect of my model of such transitions would be this. We may therefore speak about a series of minor genetic and epigenetic changes within a given lineage of one of species and so on, which from the philosophical perspective, or biological/philosophical, leads to an accumulation of minor phenotypic variations, which from philosophical perspective would be accidental changes, which lead to gradual change of the disposition of primary matter underlying this series of organisms within this evolutionary lineage, which leads to a situation where at a particular moment this entire complex process with many causes contributing to it leads to a situation where a substantial form of a new type is being induced from the potency of matter and actualizes this matter in a way such that we are dealing with the first example of a new cause. So therefore, I would say once again, it is very important for Aquinas to take all aspects of the definition of creation into account, and with taking all those aspects into account, we may actually provide a meaningful understanding or interpretation of philosophical or metaphysical aspects of speciation. To this, I will not say anything about this, but because we don't have time, we could add a Thomistic perspective on many other questions. What is the role of theology and chance? What is divine action in evolutionary transitions, and how it cooperates with creative causes and so forth? And it is possible here because of this distinction between primary and secondary causes. But what is crucial for me, and now I'm going to this second aspect of, or the second challenge that I want to bring against, is here as some interpretations of evolutionary theory, which is the claim that God creates through evolution. So if we go back to understanding to this definition of creation, where creation again is an instantaneous moment, therefore we have to distinguish creation that came into existence through this instantaneous moment of an act of creation from the continual transition and change that happens in creation, transitions and changes that happen in creation. So God not only brings everything into existence and ex nihilo and sustains things in existence, He also orders created things towards an end, and concerning the execution of this order, which is called government for Aquinas, and therefore at least speculatively distinct from creation. Here God acts through created causes which are intermediaries of His providence, going back to the quotation I wrote before. Therefore, from this perspective, we can clearly and state that we have to emphasize, in my opinion, that evolutionary processes do not belong to creation, to the divine act of creation, but to the divine act of government, to governatio divina. And this should become clear for us, and therefore go along with the entire tradition, which oftentimes is brought by those who are against the Thomistic interpretation of evolutionary theory and theistic evolution as such, who claim that the entire Catholic tradition speaks clearly that it is most contrary to the glory of God, Cyril of Alexandria as an example, if it were to be assumed that other beings could create, it is not right to say that what is only proper to God's inexpressible nature could be found naturally in some created things, because He alone, God, deserves to be called the Creator. And Aquinas will be clear and here, and he will say simply this: it is impossible for any creature to create either by its own power or instrumental. This is very strong and clear. And he has a series of arguments in Summa Argentinas in chapter 12, the second part. So therefore, I think that we have to be clear and emphasize that evolutionary processes should be classified as processes of production. That is, processes within which an already existing matter is being transformed, giving origin to new types of non-living and living entities. And as such, they belong to the divine governance of the created universe. Yes, they are creatures created ex nihilo, because at every moment of their existence, as Professor Oliver said, they depend on God in both their existence and their essence. But gubernatio is something yet different. It is dimension, ontological fulfillment throughout a number of incessant number, like line of transformations and changes. And the difficulty here is this. The confusion, I think, comes from in two ways. One way in which confusion enters here is when people tend to think, well, when something that has never been here before shows up in this universe, it must be creatio ex nihilo. Well, not necessarily. There may be new things that come into existence that have never been here before, but they come from transformation of an existing matter. And then the other source of confusion is on the side of theologians who want to be friends with science, which is good, but we have to build this connection carefully and carefully define our categories. And I think that therefore the category of evolutionary creation it might be imprecise, it might be deceitful here. Okay, and then I have 4 more minutes. That would be a reiteration again of what was said before. How do we know about creation? Well, the Catholic traditions will continue to value natural theology, obviously. It is the reflection on the nature of things and their stability and changeability that allows us to discover God carefully, according to Aquinas, as the first mover and cause from which everything proceeds, and the final end towards which everything is directed. And this is in Aquinas' 5 ways, especially here, first, second, and the fifth way, which shows and is foundational for deep commitment to natural theology, grounded in scripture, to crucial quotations from the Book of Wisdom and the letter to Romans, and the famous statement from the First Vatican Council, where the Church says that she holds and teaches that God, the beginning and the end of all things, can be known with certainty from the things that were created. It is very important. This certainty here, I don't think it is equal with there being clear and a clear proof for the existence of God that everybody should and has to agree with. It is rather that the Church says that through our rational analysis we can approach and discover God as the first cause, and we can do that with some level of certainty that is proper to our mental inquiry and analysis. But again, it doesn't mean that there is a proof that I think it doesn't mean necessarily that we have a proof that everybody must agree with. But having said this, we also learn obviously about creation through divine revelation, because there are aspects of creation that we learn only by faith. And these are the following aspects: that creation is the work of God who is imperishable and ultimately perfect and true. This we learn from Revelation, but also we may say some aspects of it can be found in the third and the fourth ways in Aquinas. But other aspects, such as that the creation is the work of Trinity and flows from divine love, that we can enter into a relationship with this love and this Creator, that creation is an opening of the salvation history, and that it finds its fulfillment in a new reality, a psychological reality. We learn all this by faith, and therefore the learning about creation from created reality doesn't go against the claim found in the letter to Hebrews, where we read that it's by faith that we understand that everything was created by the word of God. An echo of that we find in Aquinas and his speculation on whether we could envision or think about the world that is everlasting, I would say eternal, that everlasting that is without beginning and end in time, and yet created. He says, yes, we can envision such a model, but faith wants us to believe that the world in fact must have a temporal beginning. So this is all I prepared for today. Thank you for your attention, and I think there is some time for questions.
Thank you, Professor Tabaczek. I'm delighted that we started the morning with a Protestant theological Christianism direction of Catholic appropriation of Thomism and Catholic theological Christianism direction of Protestant understanding of Thomism. So that's there's a lovely symmetry to that. Recently, I've been reading stuff by the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who famously or infamously spent much of his life trying to square the circle. Unsuccessfully, obviously. My question is a sort of fundamental one about the nature of the presentation, a question that arises in these sorts of contexts and times, namely how one can square what seems to be an apparent circle here in terms of the relationship between an evolutionary way of approaching things and a kind of Christian account of the doctrine of creation. Given the fact that on an evolutionary account, as it's usually understood, evolution itself is a process which is essentially non-teleological. And the doctrine of creation is, of course, essentially teleological, especially this Thomistic.
Thank you very much. So, yes, this is a very interesting good question, and I spent a lot of time, actually more in my upcoming book than in my former publications. So, what happens is that there is a long conversation in philosophy of biology about functionality and teleology, where teleology has, in a way, in some circles, its way back into philosophy of biology, such that in all contemporary textbooks you find a chapter on teleology, which is objectively leaning towards bringing back teleology. Okay, and obviously, and even also when we take into account the 20th century evolutionary synthesis in biology itself, the founding fathers of this synthesis, including Francisco Ayala, who was a trained Thomist, and he then left the order and continued to work as a biologist, and he was instrumental for this synthesis. They speculated about teleology, which, bringing things, I'm trying to be short here, they bring teleology back, claiming that there is a teleological aspect to natural selection. It's because it favors creatures that are fit in the environment. It is controversial for many reasons, two of which would be first, what is natural selection? Well, it is the law of nature. What are laws of nature? Do they act? Do they do something? Or do they just describe nature? Right? So, coming to this probably too long answer to your question. From my perspective, what is absolutely crucial here and goes along, therefore, with the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition is this, that you could not have evolutionary theory without there being organisms, or let's assume that there is life already. Another question would be how life comes into existence, but assuming there is life, you can't have evolution without there being organisms who do what? By definition, they strive to survive and produce fertile offspring. And biologists take it for granted, and evolutionary biologists, they usually take it for granted without reflecting on this. And then they say, well, it's just everything that happens is just chance. Well, it's not true because again, this is the starting point, which is teleological in principle, and therefore there cannot be evolution without this. And the last sentence, or the last aspect. Nowadays, we say that we are dealing with an extended evolutionary synthesis, which is a new version of evolutionary synthesis, which takes into account a huge number of aspects of living creatures in relationship to environment, where it becomes clear, and it is openly said by biologists and philosophers of biology, that chance and natural selection were overemphasized in Darwin himself and 20th century synthesis, which doesn't mean that they are invalid or they are valid features of this feature. But other aspects are important, and those that are being brought into the conversation, virtually all of them has theological aspect to them. So therefore, I think we are approaching, or we are in a situation where there is a space for a very fruitful conversation here. Okay, I'm sorry for being maybe too long.
Father Mariusz, thank you very much for the talk. You mentioned that evolutionary processes were part of the divine term. For example, plants and animals, you explained that. So my question is regarding the human soul. So we know the soul is created immediately by God, that's the traditional theology. So, but at the same time, according to Aquinas, soul is a form of the body, that's the unity of the body and the soul. So would you put the creation of the human soul as part of the divine government or part of the first instance of creation? So where would this whole human person, the creation of human person, where would this fit?
Yeah, thank you. It's another important difficult question. So I think I would claim that souls, human souls, are a direct divine creatio ex nihilo, which is not miraculous, because miracles are things that happen rarely and outside of the operation of nature, whereas I would say this is a natural way in which human beings come to existence, which is, there is a material aspect that is worked out within the natural processes here with the creating realm, and there is direct divine action creating soul ex nihilo. And I think it makes sense on this scheme, on this model, because, again, I emphasize the dignity of creatures as causes. And I think it's crucial, it is crucial for Aquinas and for Thomistic framework, I think, that it is God's will that creation is operating in a way where causes are true causes, the things are true causes. And they do everything that is needed for creation to function in a regular way, which obviously is at the same time 100% divine action, as I said, but he was a secondary and instrumental cause. But when it comes to human soul, well, human soul is something, again, that has a beginning in time, but doesn't have an end in time. So I wouldn't say it's eternal. I wouldn't say it's everlasting because it does have a beginning in time. So it's difficult for us actually to, I don't even have a proper category for that. But because it doesn't have an end in time, it is something that goes beyond, in a way, of what is here in creative reality, because here everything is contingent and does not last forever. Okay, so therefore here, and because this soul, which has those properties, is by those properties in the image and likeness of God, or other aspects of this, but this would be one of this of Imago Dei. Because of that, it has to come through direct divine creation ex nihilo. Okay. So we are weird creatures, both in terms of how we come into existence and how we cease to exist, right? Where we have another problem, where there is a substantial change, but in a way it's not entirely a substantial change because there is a continuity, but not a continuity of a person, but of a subsisting soul, which is something good because none other substantial form can be subsistent in this world, right? So we are absolutely the weirdest creatures in the universe. But this is what God will discuss in you.
Thank you for that paper. I'm curious if you could hint at implications this would have for the sort of natural law theory that is going to fit. Obviously, on the one hand, divine action coming from God varies not in the account you take here, but as it's received by the creature, and as we construe action, the desire to survive, and so forth, I could imagine different ways in which that would inflect a natural law theory. I'm curious if you could suggest ways that might imply.
Oh gosh, I'm not an expert on this, and I'm current here. I don't have a comment. I don't have an opinion here. I'm sorry, but I just don't want to speculate. It's a good question.
Yes. So I just want to go back. You imply, and I think you must have an ontology of essences of species because you had the schema on the overhead of the parents of one species that eventually, through the dispositions of accidental change, effectuated upon the prime matter disposed to prepare for emergence, I guess, or the production of divine government of a new species. So it seems like you've got an ontology of species, of animals at least, you know. And then on the other side, you've alluded in the questions here to what's specific to the human being as being informed by a spiritual soul. So what I'm kind of wondering at, you only allude to it, but I'm wondering if you could just give us a short definition of what you see as the definition, not biological, but ontological definition of an animal species, and how that bears a resemblance to or is like the definition of a human species based on the Imago Dei.
Wow. The definition of species would be, for me, a species would be, it is a natural kind where a species would be, oh my gosh, I have a definition and I propose it.
I can help you with this. I don't have the answer. I'm going to help you with the provocation. I have trouble seeing the difference between a kangaroo and a dog, specifically. I understand that they're both animals, and then on the genus level, I can see what the difference is. I can easily see the specific difference between a human being on the one hand and the kangaroo or the dog on the other hand. But the difference between a kangaroo and a dog, I see lots of different accidents. I'm wondering what's specifically different about one or the other.
Yeah. What's specifically different would be that there will be, what's specifically different is the type of substantial form on this ontology. See, and this specific type of substantial form will then have repercussions in the phenotype of this organism. So therefore, there will be essential accidents for that given type of animal, which therefore that's why I say that there is, to some extent, this typology here is fixed, and it is fixed because you cannot be here one or in between. Some biologists today, proponents of the process ontology and philosophy in biology, they would say, while there is an evolutionary transition, you have organisms that do not either to S1 or to S2, species S1 and S3. But I think on this ontology, it's impossible. You have to be something. And therefore, that would be, there will be some necessary accidental features that are crucial, or they exemplify or they reveal what is the proper type of substantial form that actualizes this primary matter. Where in referring to human beings, my definition of human being, I am strongly anti-dualistic, and I think the dualistic understanding of human being is predominant still in the church and in theology. I would say that human being is, well, I wouldn't like to say it's just human soul, but I would say it is an immortal, maybe everlasting, we could use the term human soul that actualizes primary matter in an organic human body. But I wouldn't say it's I don't know, that body and soul coming together, or I even don't like the language of soul forming the body. It does that, but I think it's confusing because it makes many Christians think that there is soul and there is body, and soul does something to the body. And I don't like this language. Because the correlate of substantial form is primary matter, it actually is primary matter in an organic human. This is human body, not something that will be there when I die. Okay. And then Mago, here we would have to refer to the nature of human soul as again immortal and specific dispositions that we have as human beings, which are intellectual and well, I would say consciousness today of Aquinas is pretty much.
Okay, I feel conscious that I used up the last question, but we do need to break for lunch. So we have 40 minutes until 2 o'clock. We can begin our next session. There are sandwiches available for everyone outside, I think, yeah, at the bar. So you can have lunch here, at Sloan House, and please help me thank our speaker, Father Mariusz.